Videos. Hi, everybody. Welcome to AstroPath's latest video. Let me just remind you that AstroPath is a combination of Laurie Farrington of astrolore.org and myself, Jennie Date of Hidden Path Astrology. Together, we make AstroPath. And today we are here to talk about the Pisces full moon that is happening on August 30th. So that's the big topic. But before we get more into that, Laurie, is there anything you want to add to that you have hot on for sale or something like that?
Oh, well, I do sell workbooks on Etsy about each season and each new moon. I don't have them for the full moon, but we're still in a brand new Virgo season, so you might want to check that out. The workbooks are really fun. They're fun. You use your own chart, you can fill them in, and it will really help you follow the path of the season. So yeah, you can find that at AstroLore at Etsy. So there'll be a link in the show notes about that as well. And anything you have on offer, Jennie?
No, I'm just, carrying on with my meditations every month. I just posted the Virgo meditation. You can find it on my website under the Moon Phases blog. So check that out. I always attach it to each post. And that's really it for now. So
okay, so before we get into this actual new moon, let's talk about the cycles themselves. So each month we have a lunar cycle, and it starts with a new moon, and that is when the sun and the moon come to the same position. We think of these cycles as being very similar to plant cycles. So you can think of the new moon as a time of planting a seed. The seed that you'll plant each month will involve the sign that that new moon is in. So we plant a seed at the new moon. A week later, we come to the first quarter moon, which is a time to take an action to move that process forward. And then we come to the full moon, which is what we're talking about today. The full moon brings us to a point of full illumination, full growth from the plant, the seed that was planted at the new moon. And then a week after the full moon, we come to the last quarter moon, which is when we begin to break down that cycle in order for the following week, the next new moon. One of the interesting things is that that's the quick 1 month cycle. But we also want to think of these in terms of full year cycles. So in thinking about it that way, we would go back with this Pisces full moon. We would be thinking about the seed that we planted in February at the Pisces new moon. And I think that was February 20th or 21st. I think depends on
Eastern time, right?
So yeah, while you're listening to us talking about this full moon, you might want to consider and think about, can you remember what was going on, what was important to you, what you were beginning to think about or beginning to plan in February, late February, because that is now something that you can really see a lot of clarity around. Mm-hmm. So that kind of covers the cycles themselves.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, what's interesting about the shorter cycle, so the shorter cycle is the month long, is that our new moon was actually in Leo. So we're in this, this sort of rhythm now where we have a new moon in a totally different sign. And then the full moon comes about, and you really can't get a whole lot more different between Leo and Pisces. In terms of Leo's a fixed fire sign. It's all about warmth and the hearth fire and so on and so forth. And then like 2 weeks later, we have this Pisces, full moon, which is it's mutable, it's water, it's dreaming, imaginative. Though I was thinking about it, the common connection for me is they're both pretty heart-centered signs. I mean, Leo's the fiery heart, and especially with Venus retrograde, it's being more internal. And then we have this Pisces full moon, which is yin, but it's heart-centered in a different way. Like, can you be soft and forgiving and understanding of other people, which is also in its own way. So I've been having fun thinking about that, but I just want to point that out. And that new moon was on August 16th in Leo, and here we have it at the Pisces full moon.
Yeah, the Leo heart-centeredness is a very personal heart-centeredness, and the Pisces is a collective, a compassion for all. And yeah, so it's very different. You know, the reason this is so, you know, what we tend to think that a new moon would be followed by a full moon in the sign exactly opposite it. So,
Right.
so the in thinking of it that way, the opposite side to a Leo new moon would naturally be Aquarius. But because the new moon was at such a late degree, it bumped it into Pisces. So that's kind of how that works. I hope that's explained well enough.
Yeah.
If you understand that, great. If you don't, just keep moving on.
Well, it actually brings us right into the next point, which is we want to talk a little bit about the polarity. So in this case, what we're looking at is, so now the sun is in Virgo. And so at this full moon, the Pisces moon is sitting across from the Virgo sun. And that's always the case. Every single full moon is going to be at the direct opposite sign of whatever sun zodiac season we're in. So, you know, if we're in Virgo season, we know it's Pisces. Like next time it's going to be, the sun will be in Libra, the moon will be in the opposite sign of Aries. So just to give you some understanding of how those work together. And now Laurie has brought up the image of the full moon. And do you want to talk a little bit about Pisces and Virgo?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk first about Pisces and Virgo. So, you know, here is the arrow here shows us we've got the sun down here in Virgo and the moon exactly opposite it in Pisces. You can't look at this without noticing that Saturn is conjunct the moon, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But to start out, let's talk about Virgo. You know, we just recently made a video about the Virgo season, so you might want to listen to that. You know, we talk a lot about the sun moving through Virgo and what goes on during that period of time. But so yeah, this is the polarity, Virgo and Pisces. Which should we talk about first, Jennie? Pisces or Virgo?
Well, let's just set up the backdrop a little bit. We kind of, as you mentioned, we did make the video on Virgo. Virgo's very practical. Virgo is like, hey, you know, let's get to work. Roll up your sleeves, get to work. You know, it's a very focused sign in that way. I like to think a lot about practice, like the diligent practice that you have to do. Like if you really want to get good at something, you have to practice, like whether it's a musical instrument or writing, or, you know, or I mean, or sport, it doesn't matter. You have to practice and practice and practice. And so I think Virgo really nicely sums that up, that you must do that with regularity. So, I mean, that's kind of my sort of short version of Virgo.
Yeah, and my add to that would be that Virgo has this incredible ability to see potential, and that's why it needs to practice. It needs to practice to reach that potential, and that need for Virgo to reach for potential is also the thing that causes Virgo problems, which is the problem for Virgo. You know, all the signs have a positive and more difficult expression, and for Virgo there is that tendency toward extreme self-criticism.
Yeah, like berating yourself,
Right.
being real negative to yourself. I mean, and I'm sure many of our listeners can relate to those times in your life where you kind of beat yourself up about something. And you're right, that is totally the cautionary tale of Virgo, you know, because God, really, it's such a lovely service-oriented sign. And more than any other sign, I feel like it gets it done. It sees that somebody needs help and it goes out and helps immediately. You know, it sees like, oh, that person's hungry. I'm going to go to the store and I'm going to make soup. You know, it's which is a very organized process that you must engage in. And then you go and help the person, you know, so it's very focused on the minutia of how to do that. It's very analytical. So it can like look around and go, ooh, that's the thing that needs help. That's not that important. This thing is important, and really dial in on what is the most important thing that should have its focus. So Just very
Virgo
different from Pisces, right?
is very different from Pisces. I mean, Virgo is ruled by Mercury. And like you said, it's very analytical. And if you're listening to this and you're hearing us talk about all these ways that Virgo wants to be of service and help and all that stuff, and you happen to, not be a strong Virgo component in your own chart, but you know someone who's a Virgo and you think, oh, that person is just critical. They're not helping. They're just critical. Well, you want to really, really understand that that's the negative side of Virgo. And if you see that coming out, it's that person is doing more of that to themselves than to anyone around them. That's the hard side of Virgo, is the criticism, the self-criticism that sometimes flows outward to others. So if you see that in a strong Virgo person, again, look at the polarity and find the compassion in yourself to understand that they're beating themselves up way more than they're beating up anyone else.
Nice.
So
yeah,
I love Virgo. It's one of my favorite signs. I just love Virgo.
It's fun to always, and this is what's so cool about the polarities, which is we get an opportunity every full moon to talk about polarities. So how is Pisces, different from Virgo? Well, it's a water sign, and it's much more concerned with the imaginative. There's not a whole lot of boundaries going on with Pisces. Pisces is not about the minutia, the nuts and bolts. Pisces is about stepping back and seeing the bigger picture. And in many cases, it's extremely idealistic. So we talk about the rosy colored glasses of Pisces, where you just see the clouds and the wonderfulness of things. But Pisces can also symbolize confusion and fogginess and just uncertainty of, like, I don't know what's ahead. I don't know what's going on. So for that reason, it's really important to kind of get into the softer view of things with Pisces, and take a step back and take a little break and pause so that you can look at just the softer view of everything around you and see that some of the more difficult things in life, like other people's suffering, is a Pisces thing. So therefore, the development of compassion is very important for Pisces. So you're probably kind of hearing now a couple little similar-ish themes to Virgo, but also how it's very different.
Yeah. So some of the similarities come from the fact that they're both mutable signs. They're both very adaptable. Pisces, is known for, not having a lot of boundaries. Okay. So that's part of the Pisces thing. But these two, the polarities are always two sides to the same coin, and they always can support each other. So you take someone with no boundaries, or an energy with no boundaries, and you bring in the analytical understanding of potential, and you do the work to support that imagination and compassion of Pisces.
Yeah. And just to plant a little image in your head, if you're kind of like, I'm not quite sure about these polarities yet, I just think about Mother Teresa with these polarities, where Mother Teresa had this vision. So the Pisces, and she was obviously a religious figure and so on and so forth too, but she had this vision. And then she went out on the streets of Calcutta, was what it was called at the time, and got to work and help the poor. So that really beautifully brings the two together. So that's always my kind of image of, like, how they really work well together. So
that's lovely. Yeah. So with this particular full moon, what do we need to consider? We need to consider, first of all, that Saturn is right there conjunct that moon. What's that going to how's that going to show up? Like, okay, on August 30th, 9:35 p.m. in Eastern time, we've got this full moon. How is Saturn being connected to that moon going to impact the celebratory way that we think about full moons?
Well, when you put it that way, the first thing is there's a seriousness that's happening. But what I think is interesting is that what it does, from my astrology view, is it brings in more tangibility. So we're already in Virgo season, and we're thinking about Earth and practicality, and you have this transcendent full moon, yet it's conjunct, Saturn. Saturn brings in an element of reality, of more structure than you might picture with Pisces. So it kind of I don't know, in a way, it almost weights everything towards, yep, we're sure in Virgo season, and it's bringing a need for accountability with whatever
Mhm.
your vision is. There's a need for, how do you make your dream into reality? I think that's how you, Laurie, like to talk about, which is great. You know, how do you, bring something to fruition in a real way?
Yeah, and I also think with that moon in Pisces, it's like the view of human suffering.
Hmm.
Saturn is like, yeah, what's your accountability for that?
Mm.
Do you need to
Yeah.
go make the soup like Mother Teresa did? Or do you need to, what is it? What is your accountability when you see so clearly the suffering that's going on around us?
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that that can feel overwhelming, right? Because there's so much going on. But that's what's great about Virgo. You bring it back to something simple, a simple act. I mean, maybe your neighbor's trying to bring their groceries in the house and they're kind of infirm. You bring a bag of groceries in. I mean, it's as simple as that on that level. And I think so. Hopefully, this full moon kind of ushers in this idea of like, just looking around, and if you're already kind of adopting that stance of, gosh, I do want to help people, this is a lot, that you will see these little tiny ways that you can help. So
There's so much. I mean, Jennie and I got on here and talked about this chart for quite a while before we started making this video. And there's so many things to talk about. But I think I would really encourage you, if you want more information about really where we're at in our human process, listen to the video where we talked about Saturn moving into Pisces. That is connected with what's going on here for sure. The Venus retrograde video is also really important. I feel like this time of seeing the view from the most recent new moon is really connected to the fact that we have been in this Venus retrograde since late in July. And right now, Venus has pulled away from the sun enough that she has come out of the darkness, and she is now once again our morning star. This is a beautiful statement, and I think it's really connected to the illumination that's going on at this point.
yeah, I like how when we are talking about this video and you brought that up, and I think, I mean, this is what one of my favorite things about astrology is the fact that, yep, you can go outside at the right time and see these things in the sky. And what this means is that you will just be able to make Venus out in the very, very early morning sky. So you can actually go and see what we're talking about. And then we bring in all this symbolism, and so, and as you said, I think just, yeah, encourage you to watch that video that we made for more information about the Venus retrograde. But it really does bring in a nice flavor. I think, what have you been saying about it, Laurie? Just like really getting clear about what you really desire and
Yeah.
how to kind of bring that forwards. And then this folds in the whole service. It's not just about you, it's how, but you following your dream enables you to also be of service to other people when you're being genuinely connected to that.
Right.
So
Right.
something about all
Yeah.
that.
I think that the go out early in the morning and look for Venus in the eastern sky. Over the coming weeks and months, it'll be clearer and clearer as it goes direct again on September 3rd and starts really, making some distance from the sun. So, but you can see it's far enough away from the sun at this point that as it comes over the horizon, you can see it now. And yeah, Venus as a morning star is a beautiful thing to see.
Nice. Yeah. Awesome.
Anything else about this particular chart that we want to dig into? I mean, we could talk about it all day, but
I think the only other, I mean, you're right, but the only other important thing I think is just to recognize that Mercury is retrograde and Mercury is in its home sign of Virgo. We're in Virgo season. And quite honestly, Mercury is the boss in terms of this whole thing. So even as we're thinking about service and what, how do you need to be accountable and all these things, this is part of this larger internal process for each of us in the Mercury retrograde, because the Mercury retrograde gives you time to kind of ruminate on, you know, the deeper things, like the subtext of the actions that you take, like really getting clear about your internal view, your internal process. And so that is something just to kind of just keep in mind, that there's always an internal process, but this really is an internal process.
Yeah, and
So
it's really interesting. At this new moon, both Mercury and Venus are retrograde. And personally, I think of that as an opportunity. We are really renegotiating our own values and our own thinking about how to be of service and how to create a life that we love. And we are in this process right now. It's quite interesting. Because you don't very often see those two retrograde at the same time. And you know, listen to our video about Virgo season, listen to our video about the Venus retrograde and Saturn moving into Pisces. Those are the three I think that are the most relevant for where we're at right now. So if you haven't listened to them, it might be helpful to do so. And yeah, Mercury is the boss. Everybody is answering to Mercury right now as far as dispositors in this chart. So watch your thought process, rework what you're thinking about, how you can be of service, how you can function and do the diligent day-to-day practices, the minutia of your life in whatever area it is in at this point with the Virgo Sun. And we'll go through the sign by sign and you can see where that's happening.
yeah. So yeah, overall themes of the dream, getting enough rest to some degree so that you can follow through and work really hard. You know, it's kind of it's a perfect full moon. Asking you to work two things at once in a way. So
right. So
yeah.
celebrating. So what you're celebrating here really is having the diligence to do the work to support the dream. Right.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Okay. Are we ready to move on?
I think so.
Okay. Let's go on to folks with Aries rising.
Okay. So Aries rising, this full moon is landing in your 12th house. The 12th house is also, like Pisces, pretty intangible. But I think a psychological way to think about it is these are the subconscious patterns that are kind of hidden out of view. And right now at this full moon, it's bringing that into clearer view, clearer fuzzy view because it's Pisces. So it's not crystal clear, but you are getting an opportunity to kind of just look at the deeper layers of your unconscious and your subconscious in an interesting way. And let's not forget that we are in Virgo season. So Virgo season, again, is having to do the practical tasks, you know, this sort of be organized and have a plan. And for you with Aries rising, that is all about your routines. Like, I mean, they tie really nicely together. Like you're looking at your routines, you're overhauling your routines, you're asking if they support you in your physical health. That's going to be very, very important for Aries rising. So that's kind of the, you know, during the Virgo season, that really has your attention. But you do want to think about 6 months ago, like, can you remember back to February where something about your subconscious patterns maybe, you know, caught your attention in a new way that you could no longer ignore? And now we're 6 months in. So think back to that point for more clues about what this Pisces full moon is really illuminating in your 12th house.
Right.
Yeah.
So what happened 6 months ago in February? Did you start working with a new therapist? Did you read some book that really got you thinking about those unconscious patterns? What began then that now you can see how far that has come and what adjustments you need to make to it? And I would think that the adjustments are being made clear by that, the minutia of the day-to-day routines that you're working on, that will really support the clarity of the dreamy space where you don't have a whole lot of clarity, but you do, you know, this is really there's something here too, with it being in the 12th house. You can think of it like you were saying, Jennie, about the your unconscious internal subconscious processes. And also, there's something very spiritual in this house. There's an opening of, I think with this full moon, you want to really pay attention to your dreams at this point, and where they may be opening windows of understanding of how to work with this. If you've got Aries rising, it's really interesting to think about. Aries rising comes across with all this strength and determination, and here I am. And yet, in this subconscious place, there is an ability to tap into real collective consciousness, real spiritual openings to understanding big picture collective suffering. It's an interesting place. So pay attention to your dreams and allow your day-to-day routine processes to support your understanding of your unconscious.
Yes. And Laurie, I just had another thought because you brought up dreams. It's possible that what the Virgo symbolizes is your connection to your sleep. It's funny because sleep has been coming up a lot for me lately. I've had a lot of people having problems with it. And so there's something about figure out what you need to for your sleep, which definitely has to do with how do you not ruminate and get into anxious mindsets, close to bed, in order for you to have that dream space. It just came to me. And because both of these things have to do with health, and sleep is absolutely important to your health. So if you're having any sleep issues, see what you can do to get to the bottom of it in this time, because you need that dream space, and you need the rest. So
yeah, and there's an awfully lot of resources online right now talking about, different ways to work with your routines to support sleep. I think that's really important. I'm really glad you brought that up, and the whole idea of the rumination. And with Mercury retrograde in Virgo, we're all going to be struggling with a certain amount of analytical rumination. Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Cool.
So, and
right.
I don't mean that to sound in any way as a negative around Mercury retrograde, because I love Mercury retrograde. So anyway, moving right along, we're going to go to folks with Taurus rising, and this puts the illumination of that full moon into your 11th house, which is the area that really speaks to community. But, kind of underlying that is what are your hopes and dreams that community supports? And with Pisces there's some tendency to, maybe have some confusion in that area, not really having a community or understanding what the community is that supports you. But this is an area where you really want to pay attention right now. And what is your community? How are you being supported by community? How is compassion part of that community? And we've got to think about the fact that we are in Virgo season, and where the energy is being reflected from is from that 5th house of our creativity, how we give love. This polarity from the 5th to the 11th house is really interesting. It's, the 5th house is where we give love, the 11th is where we receive it. With Virgo here in the 5th house, there's a real particular way in which you have a judgmental edge to what it is you create, possibly. You also understand the potential. And this is where I'm kind of getting lost here, Jennie. Help me out.
No, I think you're drawing some nice parallels to like what you need to do. I mean, it's almost like what I was thinking of is if you do have confusion around who are your people, who supports you, maybe you're not sure right now. And the answer at this moment is to get into your creative practices. Use that Virgo in the 5th house to just say, you know what, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to set my plan, and I'm going to sit down and for these next couple hours or whatever, I'm going to do whatever it is, whatever artistic or creative pursuit, whether it's writing, or it even could be, there's other things you could use here, like playfulness with children, things like that. But make sure that happens, because that's what's going to clear out the confusion about the community that supports you. That's kind of what I was thinking. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because it really is. Yeah, that creativity. And when I use that term creativity, it is any of the ways that we give of ourselves most directly. Old time astrologers would talk about the 5th house as children, love affairs, and creativity and fun. So those are, when you're really having fun, that's a 5th house activity. You are giving of yourself to whatever it is. The same with creativity, the same with a new love. So yes, if you are struggling with understanding what your community is or receiving what you need from it, give of yourself, and that will support the coming back, the acceptance. It's sort of, it's like you are giving of yourself, you are being of service with your gifts of self, and that allows you to open up and receive the compassion from community.
Yeah. And I mean, part of the equation here that we can't leave out is, especially with Mercury retrograde in Virgo, is that it's possible that there's a great deal of criticism around your creative process. So it's possible that you may not really allow yourself to have fun and unbridled playfulness because there's some kind of judgment, or there's something about, but I'm not working hard enough to allow that, So this is a moment in time when, if that's true for you, there's this window of time in which to kind of undo that by seeing yourself in a different light through the eyes of your community. That you actually have this gift and this service that you can offer, and beating yourself up is not helpful, and so this gives you a moment to kind of go, am I doing that? And is there a way that you can find more playfulness? And maybe it does involve hanging out with a group of people and just letting it go a little bit, and like indulging in that more community side of it. Yeah. Well, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Well, the other thing I wanted to bring in is just that with Saturn being there with the moon, for a couple of months now, you've been working on developing this community or whatever. You've been working in some way around this, around a community, finding a community, developing a community, supporting a community, whatever it is. There's been effort in this area. And this kind of shines a light on how that's going, and how you are learning to allow yourself to be supported.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I was just going to add just real quick was that it's also possible that the Pisces can represent some sort of spiritual community that supports your bigger vision of things. But that was just a side note. I think we've covered it, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to those of you that have Gemini rising.
So Gemini rising, I think, Laurie, you put this beautifully earlier. You said something about, if you're a Gemini rising person, then you are likely a type of person who does have some sort of vision around your career and your profession. So that's really nice, because this Pisces full moon really highlights that possibility. The Pisces full moon is landing in your 10th house of career. So there's some way in which you're bringing that imaginative, compassionate element into your work life. And during Virgo season, a lot of your diligent practice and effort is being put into either your home life or your foundation somehow. I mean, there's always that interplay here of your home life and your work life with the 4th and the 10th house. And that's what this Virgo Pisces polarity is bringing in. And, my example I was thinking of earlier was just like, a person I know who's making not a full career change, but is working more on playing music and showing up in public playing that music, which is definitely a Pisces in the 10th house thing. And in order to do that, this person needs to work very hard on the day-to-day practice of the playing guitar and playing the music, and so it brings in that Virgo as a foundation, working on that thing as part of your core foundation. And so I think that's a really good example. So, think in your own life, is there something that started back in February that had to do with the way that you showed up in public, either professionally or your reputation, that some sort of shift happened? And that can help you think about this in terms of a year-long cycle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's really interesting to think about that. We can think about that, that your example is so perfect because Pisces, among other things, is going to bring in issues of music. It can, at least, but it's interesting. I was thinking of, we try to stay on a more positive perspective here. We think of Pisces as bringing in lack of boundaries, but compassion and an understanding, and Virgo being, the potential and the hard work. We can also think of this as really, it's sometimes good to think about the more negative side of it because it helps us see the full picture, right? So that Pisces can really bring in an understanding of the suffering that can come through your career or your reputation if you don't, if you stay in a super critical manner within the home and family. You can imagine that this super criticism at home resulting in suffering out in the world. So, if you happen to be stuck in that kind of a pattern, which certainly can happen, you want to really, really go back to the diligent creation of routines, of practical service in the home. Maybe, if your mother lives next door, bake her something and bring it to her, or, whatever it is, some family member needs some help them. And that will allow you to bring more of a compassion out into the world rather than just being all critical about that root core. I'm thinking about a different person than you are, clearly, but you can see that reflection of how those things work.
No, it's really important. It's always a two-way street with those polarities, and it's think about your own life and how this applies. Yeah, and that's really it. Okay.
Bottom line, take some, doing that understanding of what's going on in your home in order to allow for more of the wisdom of the compassion and expansion there in that 10th house. That's pretty sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. We will go on to those of you with Cancer rising, and this puts the Pisces full moon in your 9th house. So what's being illuminated in this moment of the full moon is your ideals, your idealistic, beautiful vision of the world. Your worldview. The 9th house is really your worldview. It brings in all the things that we develop our worldview out of, such as education, travel, the understanding of other cultures comes in here. So in some way, since Saturn moved in there a few months ago, you've been kind of working on developing a deeper understanding of this area. So now this kind of gives you a moment to think about, well, how's that going? How is my idealistic view of, my worldview developing? And, look for that. There's on a more difficult level, you might find yourself feeling a little confused in this area or a little lost. So what do you do in that case? You think about the polarity. You go down here to Virgo in the 3rd house and you do your day-to-day practices. You do your routines. You think about Virgo. Virgo is developing potential through minutia, through those little details. If you want to write a huge paper in your higher education, what do you have to do to support that? You have to figure out how to spell the words, right? These two lines are so connected. Polarities are always two sides of the same coin, and the full moon shows that. You want to illuminate your higher understanding. Maybe you want to go back to school. Well, what do you do to prepare for that? You need to practice writing and communicating in that third house.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to think about. I like thinking about the third and the ninth house. They're two of the houses that are very much concerned with learning. Like, what shifts do you need to make in order to transition? They're sort of transitional houses. And it's kind of like the ninth house is, as you're very much saying, Laurie, is an easy way to think about it is the ninth house is like college, higher education. You meet all these new people, you have these new professors, you're out on your own from your, family, if you're doing it as a younger person, from your family of origin and all that kind of stuff. Huge new experience. And then the third house is like, elementary school, like way back when you had to sit in a classroom and maybe you had to sit at a desk and you had to follow the instructions and you had to prove that you could spell and that you could read and, all these things. And so in a way, if you think about those two things, it is very much like, that's how you do the work. You do the actual work, the gaining of the wisdom and the pursuit of wisdom and the broader, knowledge and all that is very much come about by putting your nose to the grindstone, reading those books, reading, the singular words on the pages of the book and and then you make it through that book and there's another book. I mean, it really kind of brings in that kind of view, and it doesn't have to be books and whatever, but that's just a really good example of the kind of minutia and steadiness you have to do.
You can't go to college without going to the earlier years of school first. You can't go on a big travel adventure without studying the maps first.
Yeah, or making the plans. Like, if you don't book the plane ticket, it's not ever happening, right?
I mean, studying a map is something nobody does anymore, but I'm kind of using that as that's the planning. The third house planning has to happen in order for the expansion into the ninth house. So that's what you really want to think about right now. What is it that you're learning about how to expand your view up here? Because Saturn's in there now. So you're learning a lot. And you have to, right now with Mercury retrograde down here, you're being reminded to kind of relearn some of those things. Really think about it. Okay, you want to go to college and learn something new? Well, you better double check, make sure you're ready, make sure you've got that plan set. These two are in a lovely relationship. So here you go. It's illuminated now.
Yeah. And again, with that Saturn in the ninth house as well, there's an accountability thing. There's a reality that's coming your way. So, wow, I could keep rattling on, but I think we've covered it.
Okay, let's go on then to those of you with Leo rising.
So Leo rising, interestingly, this brings that Pisces full moon right into your 8th house. The 8th house is that place where you kind of grapple with other people's stuff, their resources, their ideas about money, their baggage, their intense emotional issues. And with Leo rising, this is a place where ideally you have been able to develop compassion over time for other people with their difficult stuff, because it's just kind of part of your chart in a lot of ways. And so this Pisces full moon is kind of bringing those issues up to the forefront. Your ability to have compassion for others in their challenging things. And interestingly, so the 8th house deals with other people's stuff. Well, the 2nd house deals with your stuff. So there's something about during Virgo season, you dealing with your stuff. So on the innermost level, that might be really noticing if you are hypercritical, like checking in with your self-esteem. How do you value yourself? Are you able to be kind to yourself? Like some of those things. On a more practical level, you might be thinking about what's going on with your money, because Virgo, to do with your money house, like that could be If you're a person with extra income, you might be thinking about investments, or you might be thinking about a financial advisor. That's for anybody, money or not. You know, you might be thinking about these kind of the minutia of what's going on with your finances. But really, it's the self-worth piece as you value yourself that's going to allow you to figure out how to deal with that more compassionate end of other people's stuff. You know, there's a very close relationship here. You know, if you're feeling critical of yourself, you know, it might be either really difficult to be kinder to other people, or you might sort of be able to be kind to other people, but not yourself. So there's a really interesting question here for you to think about. And perhaps to shed a bit more light, think back to February. Was there anything that came up around other people's money? I mean, maybe you got an inheritance, or, you know, maybe you lost money on an investment because that investor you don't think did a good job for you. You know, I mean, those are some issues that you might think about, or at least can represent that type of energy.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting that you said that. I was thinking about, you know, kind of yeah, it's we need to talk about both the positive and the negative of these. And it's interesting, you know, thinking about that 8th house of the development of compassion for other people's baggage and other people's difficulties. But there's also, like you said, with the investor that messed up how they invested your money, we can also suffer a great deal from wherever Pisces is. So if in February, yeah, you were overly compassionate, maybe, you know, you got to always remember with Pisces, there's a tendency to not have the boundaries we need. We can be really boundaryless in that area. Right now with Saturn in Pisces, we are learning, you know, if you've got Leo rising, you are learning to set boundaries. That's a big piece of your learning over the next couple of years. And this kind of highlights it. And if something happened back in February that kind of shook you in that way, like the investor or whatever it was, then this really gives you an opportunity to, you know, I think of this full moon in a lot of ways being so connected to Saturn as really showing us the work that we've been doing since Saturn went into that house. So Saturn is helping us really create a structure for the compassion that we are, you know, you can't have compassion for people, for other people's baggage, if you don't have boundaries. You'll get yourself in big trouble if you try to be compassionate for everybody without having boundaries. Believe me, that it's really a recipe for disaster to go for compassion before boundaries. And this really highlights that. So if you're struggling with any of that issues, going back to the 2nd house, developing the minute detail orientation to how you manage your own money, your own self-worth issues. So yeah, that flip side, this is other people's baggage, this 8th house. The 2nd house is really your own baggage in a lot of ways. So getting really detailed about how you're managing that stuff of your own will support you in setting those boundaries.
Yeah, I really like the way you said that. And I'm just going to add one quick little thing, which is like, I like that idea of, you know, having a step-by-step. How do I value myself more? Because it sounds like such a, I don't know, such a kind of cliche, self-helpy type thing. And maybe it is, but being able to kind of set that out, like, what do I really need to do, you know, on a daily basis to support myself? I like that. I think that's really helpful. So hopefully those watching do too.
Yeah, and with that Mercury retrograde in there right now in Virgo, you are really rethinking a lot of these things about how you value yourself. And always, I think with the 2nd house, just paying attention to the link between your self-esteem and your money. You know, you might have money to invest. You might not have enough money to go get your groceries. You know, everybody's on a different path here, but really getting clear on understanding your own self-worth, regardless of what is in the bank. I think that's really important. and get your
Like have
boundaries.
enough self-worth to make some financial plan no matter what, you know?
Right.
So,
Right. Exactly. Okay. Now we're moving on to those of you with Virgo rising. So if you've got Virgo rising, the Pisces moon is falling in your 7th house of intimate partnerships, super close friends, business partners. This is, really about your most important one-on-one relationship interactions. So that's the place where you're really, that is really illuminated here. My mind is going in 10 directions. Saturn has been in here for a few months now. So you've been working to really understand your own reactions and responses in relationships. With Pisces on that line, you may hold a lot of confusion in that area. You may, again, you may have a lack of boundaries. It may be important with Saturn moving in there. Setting and being clear about your boundaries might be part of this that is highlighted at this full moon. So pay attention to that. And if you are struggling or having difficulties, or know that there are adjustments that need to be made at this full moon, where do you go? You want to go to the polarity. You want to go to making specific plans for yourself. This polarity, this 7th house is the other, that relationship. The 1st house is the most personal house. This is about you. We are now in Virgo season with Mercury retrograde in that house as well. You are really rethinking and really doing that day-to-day minutia of how do you show up authentically. Okay. And if you do that, if you get really clear about how you show up, it's going to ease the tension or the issues that are happening in the 7th house.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thinking back to February, let me bring that piece in. What happened in February that planted some sort of a seed around developing compassion or developing an ideal partnership? What happened in February that now this clarity is really showing you how far you've come with that?
Nice. Yeah, I really, all the things that you've said about the Pisces on the 7th house, and it's just, I just kind of want to reiterate some of that, because I do think with Pisces on the 7th house, there can be a tremendous struggle with having realistic relationships, because you have this very ideal, we live in a society that emphasizes couples. And so then you're kind of given this, you have this ideal about this perfect partner who's out there somewhere that's going to, ride in and swoop you up and whisk you away, and, or some other way that you have an ideal around that. And I just think that that's, on one hand, that's, there's some lovely things to that, but I also think that could be quite painful, because at some point you're going to come crashing into reality, and that can be, and Pisces can be suffering. Wherever you have Pisces can also be suffering. And so a lot of times with the 7th house thing, it's suffering that's brought about by this idealistic, belief about this knight in shining armor, kind of thing. So if that's true for you, and it can be true in not just partnerships, but as you mentioned, your really close friendships and so on. As you mentioned, the real answer is to just work with yourself and because what you need to do is ground your own viewpoint in reality. And the reality is Virgo. The reality is this kindness and this, there's some work involved and there's some effort, but also that as a Virgo rising person, you're service oriented. You want to help, so as you can kind of help yourself by having some things in place that can help you keep your feet firmly on the ground when you're in these relationship situations. And then that's going to open the door to the compassion and the kindness, and perhaps there's some forgiveness involved with whoever your partner is, rather than being stuck in the fantasy that just isn't helping you and it's creating more suffering. So there's something really powerful about the self and the other here. So
it's an interesting polarity, and I see it in so many charts. And it's so easy, you know, when we're young, before we figure out much about ourselves, people tend to, you know, the Virgo rising can be so self-critical. And you can see how a person with a lot of self-criticism is going to just give themselves away in this idealistic, you know, the knight in shining armor is going to come and save the day. It's so interesting too, how many people with this setup end up in relationships with people who are musicians or have drug or alcohol problems, quite frankly. But you know, because there is that attraction to what is intangible, what is ideal, like that sense with Virgo rising of I can save the other too. That's a
the rescue.
I'm going to rescue. Here I am, the Virgo, the practical, I'm going to save the other. So, you know, it's an interesting thing that this full moon really emphasizes deepening your understanding of that. And I think that the fact that Saturn is with the moon here and Mercury is retrograde over here really supports us making some serious changes if there are difficulties and upping our game if there aren't. I like
I think, Laurie, as you're saying these final words, it's like there's something about a self-recognition of like, you are the Virgo, you are the one who gets things done, you are the efficient one, you are the grounded one in the relationship, and leaning into that so that you can be more in the kind, soft skills that the Pisces represent, minus the delusion, right? Like there's something about that, like just, I have somebody in mind, other than who I'm making the video with, but just just recognize yourself as you're the one who gets shit done.
I love it that you said that, because it reminded me, you know, I was thinking about the musician, people who, you know, Virgo rising people who fall in love with the musician. Yeah, they better be getting things done, because that person's not bringing home a paycheck. Anyway, there we go. Now we're going to move on to those with Libra rising.
So with Libra rising, this is an interesting one because, well, I'll just carry on here. So the Pisces full moon is falling right in your 6th house of routines. So there's something being illuminated around, is there enough kind of spirituality to your routines? Is there enough imagination and, you know, flow to your routines? Maybe that's what is kind of being highlighted during the Pisces full moon. And the opposite of this is Virgo. You have Virgo in the 12th house. So let's talk about the 12th house for a minute. The 12th house is always the thing that is hidden. It's behind the scenes. It's not obvious. In a psychological sense, you can really think about this as your subconscious. Those patterns that you can't quite see for yourself, but nonetheless maybe kind of plague you. I'm saying plague because it's hard for me not to think about the negatives of Virgo here. The self-criticism, it can be almost crippling when it's in the 12th house because you don't even know you're doing it. Like beating yourself up for just simply who you are or how you are in the world. So this gives you an opportunity to work with that in a new way. I mean, with Mercury retrograde also in the 12th house, there's real potential for some ruminating, for some real, oh God, why did I say that thing or do that thing? And I'm just here to let you know that if you're watching this video and you're Libra rising, awesome, because you have this wonderful opportunity to see this in a new way and do something different, to create new routines that really incorporate self-compassion, that really incorporate how do you, learn to love yourself on a deeper level. I mean, really, it sounds maybe a little cliche or whatever, but it really is the truth. This gives you this window. You can't do this work if you can't see it. And so the full moon is showing you.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Thinking about that, the negative side of that Virgo in the 12th house, how it's so hard. And I love that Mercury is retrograde in there right now, because it really is giving you an opportunity to really re-engage and think about and go deeper in an understanding, to do that work of understanding your inner unconscious patterns.
Mm.
There are different ways to think about that 12th house. I mostly think of it in terms of the psychological unconscious patterns. You can also think of it from a spiritual perspective as there's an ability to allow, to just kind of allow an opening from other sources.
Mm.
Like our friend Mary Jo once talked about, and I've always just held this idea in my head. Anyone with a strong components in that 12th house has access to hidden information.
Mm.
So there is an element of, with Virgo in that 12th house, you have the potential to open that door. You have the potential to do the work necessary to move from self-criticism to being able to use the unconscious to be of service.
Yeah, brilliant.
And to be of service, yeah, you've got to engage with this. What I was thinking when you were talking about, I can't remember what you said, like meditation and those kind of things in the 6th house, but I want to remind you of something you said earlier when we were talking about just rest.
Mm.
I think this person, if they're going through internal unconscious challenges, Saturn has recently been in there. So you're learning to structure this area. You're learning to really do the hard work of understanding the unconscious.
Mm.
And what you need when you're in the middle of that kind of work, you need a lot of rest.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
do.
meditation would be great for this person if they're struggling in these ways. If they don't happen to have that proclivity, friggin' lay on the couch and listen to some beautiful music and allow yourself to feel that music, and it will allow some of
Mm.
those openings in that 12th house.
Oh, nice. I like how, you're talking about this, and what I was thinking too when you said, that door opens, but with Virgo in the 12th house, you have the ability to apply it. You can take this, like, whatever comes in that door, and you can do something tangible with it. I mean, that is such a gift. It is so hard to take the intangible and make it tangible. And this really kind of suggests that. So
And,
I
and
really like
just to extend this a tiny bit more for those of you with Libra rising, what Jennie just said about making it tangible, making your ability to use this in some tangible way. Look at in your own chart, where's Mercury? Because that's where you can be of tangible service,
Mm,
right?
nice. Yeah, absolutely.
I think that
Yeah.
would, yeah. And if
I
your
feel
Mercury happens to be in the 12th house, you can extend it out and find other ways, but contact us for a conversation person.
I know. I know. This one's a little, I could see this one being with Libra rising a little thorny, but incredibly fruitful.
Yeah.
Very fruitful. So, yeah.
Yeah. Make some adjustments. Here's the thing too. I don't think we talked yet about back in February.
Hmm.
What happened back in February that began a process in your 6th house? What new routine did you decide to start? What new daily practice did you decide to start? Because that will give you some idea of how far you've come with that process and what adjustments you need to make now.
Yeah, and also think part of that, what could be is something that caused you suffering. I mean, what if you couldn't get sleep? Maybe you had an bout with insomnia and the suffering that causes when you can't sleep. So also think about that, because the 6th house has to do with your routines, but also has to do with your health. And it might be the other face of Pisces is suffering. And if that's the case, then that is also something to pay attention to. Another way to have compassion for yourself, to recognize that maybe it gives you a little bit of a measuring stick. How far have I come? Am I in a healing process? That's something else to think about, and only you know the answer to that. So
Okay, I think we're ready to move on. And now we are going to those of you with Scorpio rising. So if you've got Scorpio rising, this Pisces moon is falling in your 5th house. Oh, what a lovely place to have Pisces. Don't you think, Jennie? That's lovely.
yes.
Those of you with Scorpio rising have an ideal vision, have, an ideal vision of how you give of yourselves, how you give love, how you create, what you create. The 5th house is really our creativity and how we give of ourselves on a personal level. So this is the area that's really being highlighted at this full moon. So we want to think about that. We want to think about the fact that Saturn's been in here for a couple of months now. We are developing a structured manner within which to bring our ideal vision of our creativity forward. And I feel like this full moon is kind of shining a light on that. How are you doing with that? How is the stabilizing of this area going? Pisces brings in idealism. It can also bring in compassion. So, what you do for creative work is going to involve some element of compassion. Maybe you're a little confused about that, but Saturn is helping you stabilize and structure that. At this point, we're in Virgo season. So we're looking at the polarity between the 5th and the 11th houses. And in order to support this, this area of creativity, you need the support of your community. So how's that part going? Right now, Mercury is retrograde. You're kind of doing a little bit of rumination and trying to rethink about what community means to you. The community that supports you is really in this period of time of this new moon supporting your creativity, and the other way around, right? I mean, it goes both ways. We really need support for our creativity. Now, I'm sure I'm leaving out some stuff that Jennie will fill in a minute, but before I let her or force her to jump back in, I want to go back to February, because in February we had the new moon in Pisces. Did you start some sort of a process back in February that involved how you give of yourself, a creative project, or something around your children or other people's children? Or did you start a new love affair? What began in February that is now illuminated and makes clear to you some changes that need to happen?
Yeah. No, I think you've covered a lot of ground. It's great. I was thinking about one thing we just kind of have to mention, I think, is the negative sides of Virgo. And the reason being is, the negative side of Virgo is self-criticism, it's judgment, it's, I don't know, I almost think of that berating that one can do, your internal voice where you just are so unhappy with something you did, and you can really get kind of picky and critical. And I just wonder if you are feeling frustrated with your community. Are you somebody who's feeling just like, I don't know who my community is, I don't get it, like it's just I just feel it's just not flowing for me. So if that's an experience that you're having, I think that the answer in this moment in time at the full moon is just to go ahead and just immerse yourself into something creative that you love, and just do away with any sort of internal voice. It's like, no, you're not good at that, or whatever the thing is, and just jump into, something that you just want to do, that you can just drop into. And I think that is going to enable you to unlock some of that. If you feel stuck in that community place, it might not be everybody, but it is, no matter who you are, immersing yourself in that a creative project is going to be something that's helpful during this full moon. But just kind of think about those things, because really, as a Scorpio rising person, you have so much to offer, and you have that service-oriented ethic in your place of community. So as you open yourself up to receive support, you're actually going to give of yourself through service in a way that you maybe didn't even imagine. So I think it's an
I
awesome.
love this. For some reason, I was thinking about, just bringing your creativity to community and vice versa. And what crossed my mind was those paint and sip things people do, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, that's kind of silly, although a lot of people love them, and I've never been to one. So let me stop my judgment here of thinking they're silly. It is a way where your creativity is being supported by a community and vice versa. And there's many ways, artists that teach classes, you can go, and if that resonates with you at all during this full moon, I think it could really be a powerful thing to engage in some sort of a community-based creative project.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause the other thing is, I feel like I'm being the Debbie Downer here, but
Go
or
ahead.
the Dan Downer, whatever. The other thing I just wanted to add too is it's also possible there could be suffering involved in your creative process. I mean, I consider myself a fairly artistic person, and it can be a real struggle when you feel blocked in your creative area, and it can actually create some suffering. And so again, back to the paint and sip. If you're feeling it said that a sense of suffering is actually coming from your inability to give of yourself right now, then just, do the Virgo thing and sign up for the community event, like get online or whatever, and put your name down and do the minutia. That also, so this, again, it really is a two-way street. And each of you listening to this, you've got to think about your own life and how is this applicable to your life and what's going to help you and what do you need to do right now. So, yeah.
I was thinking of it also. Yeah, it's really important to see and think of both the more positive and the more difficult sides of these things, because, we all experience a combination. Suffering in a love affair that just went bad could certainly be here as well, in which case, go to your community and be supported. Go to your community and do the minutia stuff within that community in order to allow that community to support you. I mean, there's so many ways that these things can play out, and it is important to look at both sides. And, most of us are experiencing a little bit of both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember last time, Laurie, you really talked at length. I think it was the Scorpio rising one, for Virgo season. You talked at length about community and what it means. And that's something to think about, because as you were saying that, I'm like, okay, so you just had a bad breakup, go to yoga. It's so helpful. Just go to a yoga class. It's an easy one. So that's what it made me think of. But you're right. It's like you're just making these adjustments, and these are sensitive signs. Virgo and Pisces are both sensitive, and you need to work with them with delicacy and being kind to yourself. So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Just the word sensitive. Just, we think of Pisces as being such a sensitive sign. It's a water sign and all that. But, and people don't tend to think of Virgo as sensitive. And Virgo is extraordinarily sensitive. It's not emotionally sensitive. It's sensitive on a physical level. It's very sensitive to the environment. It's sensitive to all environmental things. So, with this kind of a setup, it may be difficult for you to find a community that supports what you need on that level. You go to the paint and sip place, and the person sitting next to you might be wearing perfume, and you just can't deal with it. Those kind of sensitivities really come up wherever Virgo is in our charts. We can be extremely environmentally sensitive, just to add that here. Now let's move on. Sagittarius rising.
So Sagittarius rising, you have the Pisces full moon landing in the 4th house, which is the house of home and family. that also extends out to your roots, as in your ancestry, but also the roots of your personality. So it can be extremely internal. And also, like, there's a privacy here. So to have Pisces in this very, very private house, I mean, it's a private sanctum. So in some ways, it's kind of highlighting this, this inner sanctuary that is to do with your home life. And meanwhile, we are very much in Virgo season, and Virgo for you is in the 10th house. So this is your profession, your work life. So you go to work and you get to work and you work hard and you put in a lot of effort because you have Virgo here. And you're also, ideally, you're doing something where you feel that you're of service, that you really are doing service-oriented things, because that's what Virgo would prefer you to be doing as a profession for Sagittarius rising. So those are, that's where the polarity lands. We're also thinking a lot about, so Pisces in the 4th house, I mean, this can be a way that you really idealize your family and you put them on a pedestal and you think of them in that way. It also could be that there's some suffering in your home life. You know, there's an individual or there's a struggle that causes you pain. So you want to think about, are those things that are happening for you? And this Virgo season is really giving you an opportunity to work through your profession in the service-oriented place to help balance out what is going on in the home life. I mean, there's always this interplay between work life and home life in our society. So that is very much where this polarity is playing out. One other thing you really want to think about to make this more personal for you is think back to February and think about, was there something that happened to do with your home life that either brought in these more transcendent qualities or brought in these more difficult qualities? And just think about that so that it can give you some context as to what you need to do now to be in a more balanced place. So,
yeah. So the only thing I really want to add, I think, is, you know, Saturn's been in Pisces for a while, and it is closely connected with the moon right now. So there is some sort of a challenge, but also, you know, you've been working on this area. If you listen to our video about Saturn moving into Pisces, we talked a lot about Saturn's job in Pisces being to build a structure within which our ideal dream of that area of our life can manifest. So with this full moon, I feel like it's really a time to look at it and think about it. How has that gone? How are you doing? How have you grown in your understanding of what it is you want to create in your home or family? And yeah, how is that going? With Pisces there, like Jennie said, you know, it brings in all of this beautiful compassion. You might be feeling very compassionate toward your family members, or very confused and suffering a great deal. You know, it might have something to do with not your own suffering, but you're witnessing the suffering of your family members. In that manner. And whatever it is, whatever that issue is going on there, yeah, you want to look to the Virgo. Mercury is retrograde up here right now. You're really rethinking your commitment to your career, your, you know, how you manage that area of your life. So that's where the real focus is right now. You want to think about what adjustments you need to make. That's the thing with the full moon. It shows us the clarity where we are at in this area. And it allows us this moment in time to see it clearly enough to see the adjustments that need to be made.
Yeah. And I was thinking too, it's funny because you have to talk about the challenges of the signs and also the pluses, but I was also just thinking here, like, if you are somebody who you're happy in your profession and it is a service-oriented profession and you're sort of like, cool, I've got that, that's great. So that might be the Mercury retrograde there might ask you to think about, there might be some other projects that come your way that kind of increase that possibly. But if that's the case, that's kind of nice, because in that way you can sort of have this simplicity around your work where you're like, yep, checking the box on that. I'm doing the things I need to do, feel good there. So that really frees you up to spend more of your imaginative, dreamy energy in your home life. And like just kind of enjoy a sense of boundlessness that you may be able to feel in your home life, because Pisces really is that ability to feel, isn't it? I mean, it's emotionally sensitive, and it really can bring in this just most beautiful emotional content that is just really broadens your horizons and is extremely imaginative. So I don't know, just something to think about.
Yeah,
So
boundarylessness. I think about Pisces, you think about the ocean and just, yeah, it's a beautiful space. Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
yeah,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Okay, let's move on to Capricorn rising. So, with Capricorn rising, this brings the Pisces full moon into your third house. So your focus here and what you're really seeing this full view of is your ability to communicate. The third house really speaks to our immediate environment, the people in our immediate environment, and how we navigate that immediate environment, and how we navigate our day-to-day environment is through conversation. That's why communication and these things come together here. So you can, with Saturn there, with the moon at this new moon, we know that there's some challenge here. There's some way in which you have been working on this area for some months now since Saturn moved in here. I feel like this full moon kind of is a checkup, like, okay, how are you doing on that? How are you getting clearer and more practiced, or more structured in how you communicate? So with that issue, whatever it is going on for you, you want to think about, okay, we're in Virgo season. We are at the full moon. What is Virgo saying to us? And Virgo is up here in the 9th house, where we have our idea of what our potential worldview could be, how we can be of service in that area. You can think about these two houses as they both are involved with learning. The 9th house being the higher learning, higher understanding, worldview, and the 3rd house being, like I said, you can think of it also as, the early school years. So you think about how these two come together. And what is it that you are seeing clearly about your communication as you are looking at your worldview with a detailed perspective? So there's something here about getting detailed clarity about your worldview in order to express your ideally communicate what it is you know. Something in that. So thinking back to February, when the new moon was in Pisces in your 3rd house, what seed did you plant? Possibly, whatever it was, some idea you came up with, some thinking, it may have been a concrete plan, or it may just have been some new ideas that were coming through to you around how you could communicate what you understand to be ideal, your ideal vision of your ability to communicate. So yeah. Maybe you planted a seed to become a writer. And now with Virgo season and all this attention up here, you realize you've got to go back to school or take some classes. There's some way in which these two are working together. Huh.
Yeah, I see, it's interesting thinking about that Pisces in the 3rd house, isn't it? I mean, I think with Capricorn rising, there's this tremendous capability of being totally empathetic and compassionate in these like daily interactions. Like you see the mailman or the male person and you have this conversation about something you never expected, like this totally spiritual conversation you weren't thinking about. Or you see your neighbor and you see that they're suffering and they're struggling, and you're able to bring compassion right there into this for this person you don't even know. And I just think the world needs more of that. Like, I really like how Capricorn has that Pisces on the third house in that way. And then when you think about that and then you go up to the Virgo bit, it also just means that you can be extremely practical in how you disseminate this wisdom. You know, you can do it in a very structured, clear, simple, organized way. And wow, and people's minds are blown because you just disseminated this body of knowledge in a very simple, easy to understand thing. I mean, so I think there's a lot of capacity here to transmit important information in a way that other folks are not can't do so easily. So I really like that. The other thing I know it's all something
on
else.
the flip side, right?
I know, right? Well, the other thing I was going to say too is there also might be the capacity to carry around this dream, this transcendent dream with you on a daily basis. Like I think about like Einstein riding his bicycle, and then boom, he has this crazy idea. I mean, this transcendent idea that, I mean, I don't know which idea he got when, but that transformed mathematics forever, right? Or how we see reality forever. So there's something about that. Like it's like your dream is in your back pocket and you just kind of carry it around and boop, you can just pop it out. Oop, there's the dream, you know. And then with the Virgo stuff, again, you have this implementation ability, which is to be envied.
Right.
So it is interesting.
Yeah, and like we've talked about a few times here, we got to look at the harder side of it too. And you can think about if you have your own internal judgmentalness around your worldview, then you can get really confused and say things that you realize are totally messed up, and you suffer from what you hear and oh my God, I can't believe I said that to the woman at the grocery store. So the negative side of that can certainly play out. And if you find yourself in that kind of a situation, if you're if you've got all kinds of judgments and suffering involved in this line, you want to really focus on doing that kind of really a deep dive into understanding, analyzing your own worldview so that you can get some clarity and bring the more beautiful side, the compassion. Yeah. Getting clear about your worldview is really important in order to pull those dreams out of your pocket.
Yeah.
You got to have the clarity. Einstein had the clarity.
Yeah.
So he was able to pull those out. If you find yourself really struggling there, really do some internal investigation and get some clarity on what your worldview really is.
Yeah, it's like make a little structure so that you can understand your own philosophy better.
Yeah.
It takes me right to self-help. Like just understanding yourself better. And with Mercury retrograde in the 9th house, like this is a really important time to turn that lens on yourself and just have a deeper understanding of what exactly is the underlay of your worldview, your ability to think critically, which is such an important thing right now.
Yeah, and with Virgo there on that 9th house, it's unlikely that your path will be, I'm going to travel all over the world to learn these things, which, the 9th house is about travel. But with Virgo there, you're more apt to go to the library and study. And I know nobody, most people do their study in front of their computer these days. But whatever it is, your tendency with Virgo there is going to be, a little less than travel. You'll be doing more of a analytical internal process of learning.
Yeah. Nice. Well, okay. We've covered a bunch of topics.
Moving on.
Carrying on.
Aquarius rising.
So those of you with Aquarius rising, you have Pisces in the 2nd house. So this full moon is illuminating something about your relationship to self-worth, and your relationship to your resources, which is including and not limited to your finances. So there's something about like what has your attention during this Pisces full moon? What is being brought to light that has to do with how you value yourself? That's what you're going to want to be thinking about. And during Virgo season, there's a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of work going on around how you set boundaries behind the scenes in dealing with other people's stuff. So it's just basically Virgo season has got your attention on, are you setting boundaries that serve you? Are you setting boundaries that serve others? I mean, on one hand, you want to set boundaries, but on the other hand, you do not want to create walls. You don't want to box people out. So there's a delicate balance with an earth sign in the 8th house. There's a delicate balance around that you really want to make sure. This is a big question. Who are those boundaries serving? And are you able to serve both yourself and your needs, and at the same time help the other person? Because that's something you're going to be concerned about with Aquarius rising, and having that Virgo there. So those are some of the topics. The Pisces full moon really is just bringing about some simple questions like, are you able to be compassionate to yourself? Are you able to be kind? Are you able to see yourself in a way that fits into the collective and that is part of the larger flow of life? Or do you feel like you're suffering and you're cut off from that? That's probably some of the topics that are going to come to light at this full moon. And you want to kind of dig into that. Another thing to think about is that this is also a year-long cycle. So think back to February and think about, did anything come up in February that had to do with your finances, that had to do with the way that you are able to value yourself and consider yourself worthy? So think about that if you want to think about the longer cycles. That's going to help usher in a new viewpoint. So yeah, that's the beginning.
Yeah, interesting. Thinking about with Aquarius rising, Saturn moved into that second house of yours a few months ago. So at this full moon, the moon and Saturn are right together. So there's some way in which you want to really think about how you're being accountable with your finances. And yeah, it's interesting to think about that, especially in relation to the longer cycle of what happened in February. What was the seed you planted in the second house? Did you determine, what you determined around your money or self-worth in February? And how much have you learned since then? With Saturn in there, you're learning a lot about how your self-worth and your bank account are linked. Anybody that's been, on the end of real poverty or, without any money in the bank, what that does to your self-worth. So, you're really learning about that connection. And with Pisces there, that's not necessarily an easy learn. I think, because Pisces has no boundaries, and money and resources, those are tangible things. So this is kind of a tricky little place. You may, if you think about the more negative side of these signs, which I think it's important to see the full picture, you may experience a lot of suffering in that area. You may, your self-worth may suffer because of your finances. And that doesn't necessarily mean you're poor. There are people who have great, huge amounts of money that suffer because of the guilt involved in that. So, there's so many ways that you can think about this. But bottom line, whatever the challenge is of Saturn connected with that moon, you want to develop boundaries. You want to go to that Virgo, the sun and Mercury currently retrograde there in Virgo, and really think about how you navigate other people's money, other people's issues, and how that can support your understanding of your own values and your own resources.
Yeah, you're reminding me, I was thinking about a person with Aquarius rising, and how I think it was probably about in February, laid out a huge amount of money. I think they were buying their first home or something like that. But or buying a home, period. And just that idea of like how scary that can be to lay out, and how you can feel at sea, like, oh my God, I just did what? Like, I can't afford that. Like, whoa, really bringing in confusion and puzzlement, and then not only that, but at the same time, everybody else is looking at you like, oh, that must be nice. You just bought your own home, So there's this interesting judgment coming from other people based on their perceptions,
Oh, that's right.
looking at you, so that's just an example of how this kind of can interplay. And that maybe during Virgo season, some of your work is just around, as we said earlier, I started out with just like thinking about those boundaries, because you've got Mercury retrograde in that eighth house too. So this is a really good time to spend some time asking yourself, like, what are boundaries? I mean, I think there's some confusion. They are not barriers, and neither are they. There needs to be something in place, but they're meant to be movable and changeable and have some flow to them. So, but you don't want to box yourself in either. If you just build them too high, then you cut everybody out. So there's a real dance, there's a real skill involved in understanding, how is this impacting my health? What do I need? What boundaries do I need to keep myself in a good place? There is a lot of skill, and with Virgo there, it's like, yep, that's something that you're working with. That is really important. So
Yeah, and I just want to say one other thing about boundaries to remember is boundaries are what you will do, not what other people will do. You cannot control what another person is going to do. You can put a boundary wherever you want it. You cannot control whether someone disregards it or not. You can't control that. All you can control is what you do when faced with someone else breaking your boundaries. You cannot control another person. And I think that's a real misunderstanding for a lot of people around boundaries. They think, somebody has to follow, this is my boundary. But then what do? You can't control somebody else. It's all about what you'll do. So I think that I think that's really interesting. And I love that example you used of the person and the judgments of other people. It's like, oh my God, I spent all this money and my self-esteem is suffering because I don't know if this is scary. And then everybody is judging me. That's really a fascinating example. I like that one. Okay, so let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
And we're going to look at folks who have Pisces rising. And this brings the new moon into the first house. This is the most personal area. So this is really, the full moon is shining its light on you and how you personally hold this expression, this ideal expression of your personality. This is who you are. You are a dreamer. You are, you hold that ideal view of yourself. So currently, Saturn moved in there relatively recently. You've been really trying to put some structure into your personality because that's not always easy. People with Pisces rising can often be a little confused about who they are and how they show up in the world. Saturn is currently trying to help you structure that area and stabilize it and get some clarity there. And this full moon really is sort of like, okay, how are you doing with that? How are you setting those personal responsibilities of, who you are in place? So it's kind of a fluid dance there with the full moon there. And the flip side, here we are in Virgo season. It's really, the minutia of how you navigate personal relationships that supports your ability to kind of do this dance of figuring out how to show up for yourself as yourself.
Yeah. Well, I see, as you're mentioning this, had this little picture in my mind, as happens with these things, of just being the doer in the relationship, like the one who gets everything done and does all the plans and does the shopping and picked up the kids and and meanwhile being pissed off and frustrated and feeling critical, like, why do I have to do everything? Like, you know, and I hear this, you know, constantly, mostly in heterosexual marriages, but anyway, but of just like a real struggle. I know. I mean, just being honest, this is my little life. But there's a struggle here, you know, and so if that is the case, if you are feeling that kind of frustration and aggravation, it's really because you have lost your kind of rudder, you know, where you really are, as you said, Laurie, this dreamy, imaginative person. You have this much bigger, broader purpose and feeling of life, and like that minutia can get old when you're not able to dream, when you're not able to have the imaginative space as well. So that's really what it's indicative of, is that you are not following through on your, in some way, like on your more dreamy, imaginative, compassionate end of your personality, you know. And I will tell you, in this society, it's hard to do that. It's hard to carve out space to allow yourself to dream, to allow yourself to be in that big imaginative space. And so a lot of times I think people with Pisces rising may very well kind of squish that end of it down and focus on how efficient and productive they are in the relationship. And that's really what the first and the seventh house brings in, as, you know, the self and other. So it's kind of a tough one.
I like how you're saying that, and it's making me think of Saturn being in that first house, more like responsibility to self. You know, your responsibility is to find who you are and to get some structure and clarity around yourself, so that you don't just, you know, let it go. In, you know, that whole idea of you know, letting go of yourself, not taking care of yourself in favor of doing all the stuff for the person you're in relationship with. So at this period of time, with Mercury currently retrograde there in your seventh house, you're really rethinking how you organize and function within a partnership, what your expectations are, all of that stuff. You're analyzing what is necessary to make and build a healthy relationship and be responsible to the dreamy side of who you are. Back in February, what occurred in February at the Pisces new moon? There was something that occurred that kind of probably, you know, bubbled up this issue for you of needing to get a more clear determination of what's important to you as an authentic individual. And this full moon can show you how far you've come with that, how you're doing, not only with that seed that was planted back in February, but also as Saturn is in here as well. You're really being accountable to yourself and responsible to yourself.
Yeah.
And allowing your partner to support you in that as well.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to make the partner the bad person here at all. This is your process, how you are figuring out how to be fully, authentically yourself, while at the same time maintaining relationships. I mean, you might be single. This doesn't necessarily have anything to do with a spouse or a romantic partner. It could be, you know, any one-on-one significant, equal, or intended to be equal partnership, a business partner, a best friend.
Yeah, I was just going to add too that if you are in that kind of critical, judgy, unhappy space, don't let that beat you up too. Like, just sort of go, oh, wow, look at that. There's my signpost. Okay, I need to make an adjustment. Because I think it's really easy when you catch yourself, you're like, oh my God, I'm such a jerk. I was so rude, and it kind of spirals. And I just think it's like, no, you know, just release that. It's a rigidity that you just don't need. And just go, oh, I just need to make an adjustment. And why? Because I'm not allowing this more fruitful, flourishing, imagined space to happen. So it's just a signpost. And I just like to remind people that, because it's easy to get really stuck, especially with Mercury retrograde, into how you did this wrong and how you did that wrong, and you spiral, and you know, you just interrupt that process by just reject that. You don't need to do that. But anyway, so that's all I want to add. We've covered a
So
lot.
make some adjustments, get clear about really expressing your authentic, dreamy, beautiful self. Okay.
Lovely.
I
Okay.
think that covers everything, and goodbye, everyone.
Thank
We
you.
will
Thanks, Laurie.
see you all again very soon. Thank you, Jennie.